Okay, well, good morning, afternoon, whatever time it is for you. So, we are going to talk about the Presocratics. So, last class we were talking about mythology, right? So, first we had mythology, and mythology has to do, of course, with the gods and the supernatural, right? And so here, with this type of thinking, the Greeks try to understand the universe through the invention of the gods, right? You remember that whole thing about Uranus and Kronos and all that stuff. So what happens at around 650 BC, one of the first guys is named Thales, realizes that, if you think about it, this mythology stuff is really kind of a bad idea. One, you can understand that it's bad ethics, right? So if this is your religion, right? So just imagine, that you would tell your children this story. It's a bad story to tell kids if that's going to be the foundation of your political and ethical system. Also, aside from that, it's unverifiable. I mean, we know, for instance, that although Homer and Hesiod wrote these myths down, they were oral translations over hundreds and hundreds of years. And so at the end of the day, and Socrates will get into this, the people in charge of the gods are really poets. And so one of the dangerous things, really, by poets and entertainers, because the point of these guys was to, get paid to entertain people. And indeed, if they're entertaining people, their stories need to be, exciting. And you can imagine, the difference between reading a book and watching the movie. Most of us would prefer to watch the movie because of the level of entertainment and excitement. So, if you consider that, then you've kind of got, with these myths, a recipe for disaster in a way. Okay, so along come these Presocratics. The first guy is named Thales, and we are going to look at a few of them. And if you recall, we had said that they are given their name because they were before Socrates. So we're going to look at Thales, Pythagoras, and Democritus. That's who we're going to look at in the next little while. And I'm not going to have you read anything from these guys. I'm just going to go ahead and explain it. So one of the things that all these guys have in common is that they are trying to understand what's called the first principle of the universe. In other words, they're looking for the origin of things. If you recall, in mythology, we had said that the first principle was empty chaos. Do you remember that whole thing? And obviously this is, quite illogical. And so these guys are trying to come at this in a different way. So Thales says that the first principle of all things is water. Okay, so why water? Well, the Greeks believed that there are 4 elements, right? Today we have, 121, I think, elements on the periodic table. But to the Greeks, these were the only elements there were: fire, water, air, and earth. And all of these have qualities. Fire is constantly changing. Water is fluid. Air is light. And earth is heavy. So this one is substance, right? This one is ether, they often called it, right? Spirit almost. Water is a fluid substance, and fire is always changing. Okay. So if these were the four elements, many of the Presocratics would sort of preface one element over another. And Thales chose water because the thing about water is water can be obviously fluid, right? Okay, so here's a glass with water in it. And it can be fluid, it can move around. But it can also take on a solid form, right? And so there's an ice cube, right, melting there. But then also, it can become steam. That's supposed to be steam going up into a cloud. So if you think of it, water can be solid, it can be fluid, it can be solid, and it can be airy. So in other words, is that such a word, airy? Well, whatever. In other words, water really can take on all of the other four elements. That's why Thales thought that it was water. Now, we may disagree, right? But then also another observation he made was that all life contains water. Where there is no water, there's no life. So if you consider, what he had working for him, and the information that he had, it makes at least sense, right? I mean, we could disagree with the guy, but at least we would be able to disagree not on whether a God exists, but whether, based on our own observation of the world and our own reason, whether his conclusions make sense. And so that is a huge difference between the Presocratics and mythological accounts. Now, another thing about Thales that's interesting is he was interested in understanding the heavens. This is an apocryphal story. So he was interested in the heavens. And so he would always be out at night, walking down the road. That's supposed to be a leg, not a skirt. Walking down the road, observing the heavens. And the idea was, and this probably came from, the Egyptians more than likely. The idea was that, the heavens contain the stars, but there's also sort of, divine forces in there. And you can understand sometimes, figure out things by looking at the stars. What Thales realized is that you can understand ultimately, you can predict certain things based on the, why did I write that? You can predict certain things based on phases of the moon and that kind of thing. And so what Thales was able to do one day was this. So there's two quick stories. One day he was walking around and he was, gazing up at the stars, and he's gazing up at the stars, trying to figure them out. And unbeknownst to him, as he's walking forward, he falls into a ditch because he wasn't paying attention. And a little slave girl came and laughed at him and said, "See, philosophy is useless. You guys can't even understand what's right in front of you." And so Thales, in order to show that, philosophy isn't useless, used his science to figure out that there was going to be a really wet winter. So he watches the stars and he discovers that there's going to be a wet winter. To make a long story short, one of the main staple crops of Greece is olive oil. And olive oil is made in a big press kind of thing, much like wine. That's supposed to be a press. You put the olives in there, you turn the handle, smash them down. They make oil out of it, and the oil comes here. And so, anyways, and there's like a vessel. So what Thales does is, he realizes, okay, there's going to be a lot of rain, which means there's going to be a lot of olives, which means a lot of people are going to need the presses. So what he does is, he buys up all the presses in the area, and when this huge bumper crop of olives comes, he has the market cornered on the presses, rents them out at exorbitant amounts of money, and makes a bundle. Whether it's true or not, who knows, right? But that, anyways, is one of the stories of Thales. And his point is, the point of that story is, it might seem at first, like to the slave girl, that philosophy is useless. It might seem, indeed, to those who don't think very much past the daily practical, that, this kind of stuff is a waste of time. But it's also the type of thinking that leads to new types of thinking and new discoveries. So that was Thales. Let's look at Pythagoras. You may have heard of Pythagoras before, right? From the Pythagorean theorem. He's the guy that says, a squared is equal to b squared plus c squared, right? Okay. Well, here was Pythagoras' thing. He's saying that the first principle of the universe was number, which is odd. Specifically, what he said was it was ratio. Okay. And here's why. Consider, if you will, that the universe can be made up into the physical. Wait, I'm going to put non-physical first. Non-physical and physical, right? For instance, if you think about it, a number is not physical, right? You cannot ever show me 2. If I ask you to show me 2, 1, you could draw it, but that's not 2, that's a squiggle. My dog would understand that as a squiggle. Or you could, hold up 2 fingers, right? But again, that's not 2. Those are objects in the universe, right? Finger, finger. And so, in a way, something like a number has a non-physical existence. Okay? Now, what Pythagoras realized is, well, there's a connection still between the non-physical and the physical. Take something like, here, this is like a harp, a lyre. Okay, well, I'm going to try to draw it anyway. And there are strings on the harp, right? And each of these strings produces a certain sound or a certain note, right? And there's a correlation between the length and thickness of the string and the sound that it makes. So in other words, what you have is, consider that sound is non-physical, right? And consider that the string is physical. But the deal is, you can express both the physical and the non-physical in number, right? Because you could quantify the length of the string and say it's, so many inches long and, so many inches wide. And also you can understand the musical note in a mathematical scale, which you could understand by number as well. So his point is, number is the one thing in the universe that can be expressed in both non-physical and physical ways. Therefore, number is the first principle of the universe. Okay. Now, we are almost... Yeah, I'm going to stop this one. These little videos are only... you can only make them 15 minutes long. So before I get into Democritus, I'm going to pause and come back and we'll look at Democritus.